Aloha, I'm Lyla Berg. Mahalo for tuning in to Island Focus. We're here at ʻIolani Palace, royal residence of Hawaii's monarchy, to converse with people who can help us understand how the past can inform the future. Thank you for tuning in to Island Focus. So this is obviously the blue room.
Of course. Yeah.
Furniture is blue, the curtains. What happened here?
Music house, receptions, informal receptions, but what I really like to focus on, or what I would prefer to focus on today in this room, is the meetings ʻIolani and Ōlelo had with their committees. Like Queen Emma, who started Queen's Hospital, and Little Lila with Little Lila Home, and Bernice Pauahi Bishop, who established the schools. Ōlelo established Ōlelo Educational Societies, which is an organization that raised money so that you could apply to them for scholarships and grants to continue education after you graduated from school here.
Wow.
Because Kamehameha III made education mandatory.
Wow. And so when we talk about partnerships and helping nonprofits, that goes back to the monarchy.
To our elite period, yes. And ʻIolani also had committees that raised money for people who had Hansen's disease. And she was also responsible for opening ʻIolani Maternity Home, which still serves the community today.
When we look at the paintings on the wall, of distinguished leaders.
Yeah. In here, there is a portrait of Louis Philippe, King of the French. It was a diplomatic gift to Kamehameha III. And it took 12 stout sailors to walk it from the pier near where Aloha Tower is now. And we understand it promptly fell to the floor. It was so heavy.
Amazing, amazing. And also the Queen.
ʻIolani's portrait and her brother's portrait were painted by William Cogswell, who also painted U.S. presidents and a number of other dignitaries in Honolulu. You see some of them at ʻIolani Hale. But he was painting them on speculation, hoping the government would buy them. And the government's like, yeah, too expensive. We can't afford it. So Ōlelo purchased the portraits. So after she was removed from power, she didn't take them home. She left them here. And her trustees gave them to the territory of Hawaii after her death.
And when you look at the furniture,
they were created locally. So they have a taro leaf and grape pattern. You're not going to find taro leaves on furniture in
right.
but a style that would have been a style similar to what might have been seen in Europe or the United States.
Mahalo for being with us today, Tyler. It's such a privilege to meet you and to learn more a little bit about Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Thank you for having me here. It's very exciting, and it's an honor to be a part of this, especially for all the episodes that you've done. So thank you again for having us.
And in the palace.
Yeah. This is an opportunity that very few get to be able to sit in these sort of spaces. The palace, I think, has had a storied history where it was not always accessible. So I think it's a really beautiful symbol that we're getting to do it here.
Well, especially when we're talking about Hawaiian homelands, not always being accessible.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit more about what you do and what's the future?
Well, Hawaiian Homelands is a product of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920, and that is a pretty monumental piece of legislation. So we're finishing our 100th year of existence, which is crazy to think about because we predate statehood, we predate many of the other agencies, and what's really important about the program is Prince Kuhio was the champion of it, and he was a non-voting delegate in Congress at the time. He was a Native Hawaiian man surrounded by most likely an all-white Congress, and even without any voting authority, he convinced them that homesteading on lands that would be inalienable, meaning that you can never give them up, specifically for Native Hawaiians for 99 years, was a worthwhile and meritorious endeavor. And here we are 100 years later, and I think he was right. And I think for everyone who voted on it at the time, I think they would agree that being able to provide access to land and housing for Native Hawaiians, which is what we do at our core, has value even 100 years later.
So let's talk a little bit more about housing. There's a philosophy here of single family homes and ownership and condos. Um, Besides the pricing, can you help us navigate through that?
Well, for Department of Hawaiian Homelands, like I mentioned, we only serve Native Hawaiians who are of 50% blood quantum or greater, or their qualifying descendants who are 25% or greater. So we have a limited audience. That said, when we look at what the demand is, we know that 76% of those waiting, they want a single family home. But the reality is, when you look at all 200,000 acres that DHHL manages, a third of it is preservation and conservation land, so it's not even suitable for putting homes on. We've got cliff sites in Waimanalo. We have watersheds that need to be preserved. So rather quickly, where you can build starts to shrink. Oʻahu has the longest wait list out of all of our island holdings, and we have the least amount of available land on Oʻahu. So when we try to address the need of the 76% of Native Hawaiians waiting for a single family home, we have to start to shift the direction of, if we cannot continue to build homes, if it's no longer sustainable to keep putting down these massive homes, how else can we serve you? How else can we help you achieve housing? And that's a very different question from how can we put you in a turnkey single family home? Sometimes that looks like rentals. I mean, it's no secret that housing is no longer affordable in Hawaii, right? The median home price just hit $1.2 million, which is obscene. My parents' generation, my parents bought the home that I grew up in for $300,000. Unheard of.
You grew up in the country, though, right? In Kailua.
I don't know if we would call Kailua country now, but
Right.
when my dad was growing up there, it was country. And to see it rapidly change to a very speculative market of these just incredibly expensive homes, the dream of home ownership, especially for my generation and the generations who are coming after me, is almost completely out of reach in a lot of these areas. And that's just, it shouldn't sit right by us, which is where DHHL serves a very beautiful mission, right? These are our lands. These are lands set aside for the Lahui, for Kanaka. And so we create these kipuka of identity because you're living in a Hawaiian place. You're living with Hawaiian neighbors. Someday, that's not going to just look like single family homes. There will be Hawaiian Homeland condominiums. There will be Hawaiian Homeland rentals. Does that meet what everybody wants? Maybe not. But I think we need to start to shift the direction of, how do we stop Native Hawaiians from fleeing the state and moving to cities like Las Vegas? And if we want that to be the goal, how do we shift our perspective of what it means to live in Hawaii?
And isn't part of that conversation also vocabulary?
It is.
But when you speak about housing, but Hawaiian homelands, it's a different concept.
Well, homesteading is a very old concept, right? And it's a Western concept. The earliest homesteading programs in Hawaii failed. I mean, that's why DHHL exists, because Kuhio saw the prior homesteading programs not succeeding. The impetus for DHHL was not just residential, it was, how do we provide agricultural homesteading opportunities on Hawaiian homelands?
So it's economic environment as well.
And pastoral, right? Ranching was a big deal in the early 1900s. Now we look around, is there a demand for a lot of ranching lands? Maybe, but we have so few. And is it economic for Hawaiian families to get into ranching? For some, yes. For others, no. Same thing for ag. Part of the problem is, and this goes to vocabulary, coming out of the 80s through the 2000s, the legislature really shifted to seeing DHHL as a housing agency. And DHHL became measured on how many homes are you building. And so what you see is, after the 80s, we haven't given out an agricultural award in over 20 years, which is a shame. But that's because the public and the legislature, they measure our success on how many residential homes have you built. And we don't want to look like failures. So you see this pivot in the course of DHHL history to meeting that need. And that's another thing I think we have to shift, is the reality of, is residential homes the only way to measure DHHL's success? I'd argue no.
Well, and especially when we have the conversation also about grow local, buy local, and the fact that we're 99% reliant on everything we import. So how do we make that transition?
Well, part of it is stronger education. I mean, the department could be doing better in terms of providing agricultural support for those lessees who are on agricultural parcels. But it's also sort of measuring expectations. Many Kanaka farmers are they're gentleman farmers, right? They farm for themselves. They farm in a subsistence way. And that's very different from the Western commercialized concept of how do I spread my farm out onto as many acres as possible and maximize the amount of crops I'm outputting. That's not the dream vision or goal for many of our Kanaka lessees. So what we've seen the department transition to in the last few years is a new award type. So it's called subsistence agricultural, smaller than the traditional ag lot, maybe a half acre, which is a lot more manageable. Kupuna, the older you get, you cannot be on 3 acres trying to farm all of your fruits. So we're giving smaller lots with fewer restrictions, fewer expectations. We're trying to make it easier. And I think that speaks to what I'd like to see for the future, not just for Hawaiian Homeland, but how do we tackle housing in general is how do we make these pathways easier for people to accomplish what they need to, whether it's farming, living in a single family home, getting their keiki or their mo'opuna into rentals. How do we make it easier? And there are many parts I think we can all agree. You are in government, so you know government does not always make it the easiest. And so, at least for me, one of the goals is how do we decrease barriers in these pathways?
Is there also an encouragement to go neighbor islands?
There is. And we have far more available lands on the neighbor islands. But what does that come down to? It comes down to legislative funding. And that depends on who is in charge of the funding, which you are also aware of. And so, you go through cycles in the legislature, and Kauai might be a priority one year, Maui another, Hawaii Island a different year. So these projects are staggered and they're prioritized based on politics, and that can make it difficult. But the reality is we do need to focus and encourage people to think about living on other islands. One of the biggest challenges the department has is many folks have been on the wait list for a very long time. I'll admit that. But when you talk to many of them, they've received 6, 10, 20 offers in the last 30, 40 years. No one talks about that. And one of the primary reasons people turn down their lots is they don't want to move. They don't want to go to another place. And I think in some ways that's very honorable, right? Because as Kanaka, we're tied to where we are. We're tied to the land. But at the same time, the vision that Kuhio had was you go make it work wherever you have to go and make it work if you want to succeed. And so the neighbor islands are certainly a priority for the department. And I think if we can get people to embrace the idea of accepting the challenge, then expanding out, we can at least stop them from being forced to leave altogether, right? If your choice was to go move to Missouri or maybe figure it out on Molokai, I would hope you would think about choosing Molokai.
So as we wrap up our conversation for today, can you give us a message of hope for the future?
Sure. I think, this was a pretty miraculous year for the department. We received $600 million from the legislature, which is the largest amount of money that's ever been allocated to the department in its 100-year history. And I think that's a credit to the department really rising to the occasion, especially through the pandemic, and saying yes to big ideas. And I think my hope for not just DHHL, but government in general, is that we're willing to embrace the possibility of trying new things and trying big things and potentially controversial things, because what can happen is you get these offshoots of hope and passion from our legislators, from our amazing staff, even from members of the public. And I think if we embrace it as a kako thing, which I think you and I talked about before our chat this morning, that's really where some of the best ideas come from, is the possibility of what can we do versus maybe a more traditional view that comes out of government which is sort of no can. And my hope is that, at least for DHHL, for another 100 years, we are able to address the housing needs, the land and cultural and identity needs of Kanaka in a way that meets everyone on the spectrum where they are.
Well, and sitting here in the palace, we definitely have a role model for that kind of courage.
I think it's you.
Thank you for being with us.
Mahalo.
You've just had the opportunity to meet Tyler Gomes, Deputy with the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So this is obviously the state dining room.
Yes, it is.
What kind of conversations would have happened here?
Would depend upon the guests. Kalakaua was really big on networking.
And how our monarchs traveled to Europe to learn from existing kingdoms.
Kalakaua traveled around the world in 1881. And sometimes they say it was his health. Sometimes he was traveling to find out about people immigrating to Hawaii. But I think he was traveling because he was curious, but he was also connecting with heads of state and monarchs internationally. How are you dealing with immigration? How are you dealing with new technology? He could be an example for education because we had Hawaiians studying abroad, government grants to send 17, I used to say young adults, but they're 10 to 25
Wow.
abroad to study, with the idea when they came home, they could be leaders in government and business.
Well, and the fact that this palace had electricity before the White House.
Yeah, 4 years before the White House.
Is really unfathomable, you know, how modern.
Out here in the middle of the Pacific. And I do need you to know that Kalakaua paid for that out of his own pocket. So don't believe any newspaper stories that say he was using government money. It was his own money.
Well,
it could have been his salary, but it was his own money.
Well, and it seems that many of the monarchs generously gave of their own coffers, of their own
They definitely did, because
lives.
Anything they could do to help their community, they were using their money and using their time and their energy to create a stronger, healthier community.
It's such a pleasure to have you with us, Hulu. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Lyla.
This place is not only special to all of us, it's very particular for you.
It is very special to me. 47 years ago, I was hired by Governor Burns to work in his office on the second floor of this building, and it has remained in my memories forever. We were able to watch the construction of the new state capitol, which he oversaw, and we were able to move there. So the transition between the ʻIolani Palace and the state capitol that we have today is a very significant memory for me. Over on this side, we had the state senate, and on this side, we had the House of Representatives, and the leadership were housed downstairs. I mean, what a time in history that I can recall to share with my grandchildren. You know, ʻIolani Palace will stand forever.
The history and the recognition that this is not just a building.
No.
It represents the psyche and the future. And in Office of Hawaiian Affairs, that's what you do as well.
Yes, I happen to chair the Board of Trustees today at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I've been there for 10 years, and I was running for my last term, but I was very blessed in being elected because no one opposed me. So I don't have to have a race this year.
It must be where you're supposed to be.
Thank you.
So from that perspective as chair, what do you envision in the future based on where we are right now? The role of ʻOHA.
We were able to increase our percentage of our public land trust, which supports the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We were stagnant at 15.1 million each year, but we have been granted an increase to 21.5 million, subject to the governor's signature, of course. We can anticipate helping our people a whole lot more. There's so much need in the Hawaiian community today in every aspect of life: health, education, welfare. Our people in prison, we have the highest statistics, and we need to help them. We really need to help them.
Maybe explain a little bit more in detail the kinds of activities that ʻOHA is leading.
First of all, we give $3 million to the Hawaiian charter schools. That's really helping them. We give $3 million a year to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands to assist them in creating housing. That's big contributions. But then we have all kinds of small, I would say at least 30 nonprofits that we help. During the pandemic, we gave millions to help our people survive through the pandemic.
Food security for medical and health.
Yes, and for mortgage, for rents, for diapers for our babies. I mean, people think that that's a small item, but it's a necessity, And even for our aged, they need assistance too. So we've been helping them in that regard.
It sounds like there's many partnerships and many
Many,
sponsorships that OHA is involved with.
yes, many, many. Like I said, we give out about 30 grants. That means we have at least 25 different partnerships, and in all the different areas that we contribute to. It's important to the community that we assist them because it helps the state as a whole. What we help our Hawaiian community with, the state doesn't have to contribute in that regard. So the grant monies go a long way. Our public land trust monies go a long way. So it's important that we work hand in hand with the legislature. So in actuality, yes, we are helping our people, but we're helping the state as a whole.
Please explain a little bit more about the role of the trustees.
Our role is a fiduciary role. We're responsible for every penny that goes out of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. But what is important is that we make policies at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and policies that will help our people. We also make policies so that we work with our communities and get their input. Our Hawaiian beneficiaries get their direct input so that we can keep them happy and that we may know their problems and be able to fix it.
Well, and help them succeed, help every family, help
Yes.
every community succeed. And the trustees are elected and elected by the general population.
We are voted by the general population. We're voted in just as the governor and the lieutenant governor is voted in. But we have a lesser percentage voting in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs section of the ballot. And I think it's because some of the people feel that they'll leave it up to the Hawaiians to decide who should be in leadership for them. But we would like to see everyone voting for OHA. We don't like to see the blank ballots. We know that there is enough media information out there that people know what OHA is doing. And we're trying to improve on that because many people don't know what OHA is doing. Since we give our monies to so many partnerships, when those partnerships distribute the money, the people think that the money came from that partnership. But in the back, it's the Office of Hawaiian Affairs money.
The Queen's, our former Queen's perspective was about inclusion and about embracing everybody to be part of the solution. I'm hearing that that's actually the direction that OHA is going.
I think that we embrace everyone because whatever help we give to our community helps the entire community. That's that much less that, let's say, the state government have to put into the different programs that we're supporting and distributing monies to.
What role does OHA play then in terms of how the money is distributed? For instance, Hawaiian Homelands or the charter schools.
We see the importance of those two, let's say, programs in our community. So that would be something that all of the trustees would immediately embrace. And there's no question, every year, it's automatic that we contribute to those two items. And there's others that let's say the Ahahui grants, which is like the ʻIolani Palace, we contribute towards ʻIolani Palace, the Merry Monarch Festival, the Keiki Hula, the Queen Liliuokalani. We contribute to all of those because that's all part of our Hawaiian community, and they need help.
So, what gives you joy? There are a lot of challenges in your role as chair and also in the organization working with other state agencies.
The joy I have is to see improvement in the areas that we contribute money. And if a beneficiary comes to us with a problem that I see that we can help because We are the Hawaiian agency that's supposed to be helping our people. A good example is there was a business on Kauai that was having a difficult time with maintaining their lease. And they were going to lose it, actually. And they came to us. And we went to see the department in charge of that lease. And we told them, Oʻahu will take over the lease. And we did. And then we sublet it back to the same people that had it. And we have had no problems with them. We like to do things like that, you know? And we have other similar problems where we step in because we're a big agency. We're a sister agency of the state agencies that are giving our people some problems. And we're able to assist them that way and help them business-wise, personal-wise. We give a lot of money to the Native Hawaiian Legal Corps. Their mandate is to help the Hawaiians maintain their lands and their ownership. So that's critical to us because, as you well know, here in Hawaii, land ownership is very complex, very complex.
And that's for another conversation.
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing you say, as growing up in Hawaii, if can, and ʻoha can.
Yes, thank you very much. ʻOha can.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Hulu Lindsey, Chair of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. Mahalo for tuning in to Island Focus. I'm Lyla Berg. On behalf of the Island Focus crew and the entire staff at Ōlelo Community Media, aloha and malama pono. Let's take care of our Hawaii. See you soon.